Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing alright. I think this is going well. My wife said she liked the last video, the look of it and the style that I'm trying to go for. And the Wi-Fi seems to be more stable than what it was. The way the people said it, they, for all intents and purposes, was throttling the house. They was like, well, we didn't realize you were going to be using it that much. What do you mean you didn't realize we were going to be using it? We're going to put you up into another level. Why do I have to ask you to put me? I'm not going there. Nevertheless, I hope everyone is doing all right. Let me check my audio. Guys, again, you already know probably what I'm going to say. I want to thank everyone for their support for the channel. It has been a trying month. It has been a trying week, to say the least. They've demonetized the entire channel. Everything from the beginning to now. So all the support that you guys give have been completely appreciated, especially a shout out and a thank you to my patrons. We're going to have a patron appreciation again today where we're going to be giving a t-shirt away, in addition to choosing the topic that we discuss today. Like I said, sometimes the topics, you guys give me far too much credit. I do these videos every day. And I know sometimes the topics can be rather complex, but it's bringing complexity with information that I'm bringing along for the ride that I need to just add to something as opposed to having it, learning it all at once. I hope that makes sense. So there's some stories that I may go more to as opposed to another just because of the amount of time it takes to actually understand the story and what's around it. I don't want to look like an asshole. I've had those videos. I don't like to repeat those videos. So there's that. And for the last point to this, oh, by the way, that show, Patron Appreciation Show, will be this evening at around 6 o'clock. For anyone that wants to help with the channel itself, I know I say this all the time, and at this point you probably already know, there's a link in the description box that you can click on that would allow you to donate. It allows you to go through a PayPal system that would allow a little Vulcan, or I think Scotty is also in there, that would get up and dance and shake and thank you very much for the assistance to the show. It is always appreciated. I've been saying that for a month. I hate to have to keep repeating it, but there it is. It's not a push. It's just a heads up. I also put the link right here in case it's hard to see that link, but the link is there, but it's also in the description box. So the thing I wanted to talk about today, do you remember California? Of course you remember California. Well, California, in addition to being ridiculously large, is also one of the forefronts of climate change. Now, it's the forefront of climate change because we're seeing forest fires in California. We're seeing them with more intensity and with more ferocity. As human beings, how do we deal with this in a capitalistic society? Well, you can imagine we deal with it like we deal with everything else in a capitalistic society, with trying to get the work on the cheap. So, in trying to get the work on the cheap, let's enter Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris tried to get a federal judge to extend the amount of time people stayed in prison, meaning her office was pushing back against them trying to release the officers because California had too many people in their prisons. They were ordered by the court to release those families. Kamala Harris's office pushed back against that, making the argument that if they release those families, that California will suffer an economic problem because they're able to get inmates dirt cheap. How dirt cheap do you say, Jamal? I mean, the average worker, I mean, the minimum wage is, what, $7.50, I think, in the United States? Is some ridiculously low amount. But you can get prison labor for like 8 cents away from slavery. Slavery is very cheap. 8 cents away, it's not that bad. And that's indeed what happened. So you had this right here. Federal judge orders California to expand prison release program. But look what happens. Federal judge on Friday ordered California to launch a new parole program that could free more prisoners early, ruling the state had failed to fully implement the order last February intended to reduce unconstitutional crowding. The judge, for a second time, ordered that all nonviolent second strike offenders be eligible for parole after serving half of their sentence. They told corrections officials to submit a new plan for the parole process on December 1st and to implement them beginning on the 1st. Right here. But the federal judicial panel did not take the action on the steps it was ordered last February. Those included increasing the sentence reduction minimum custody inmate can earn for good behavior and participation in rehabilitation and education programs. Most of these prisoners now work as groundkeepers, janitors, and in prison kitchens with wages that range from 8 cents to 37 cents an hour. 8 cents away from slave labor. Lawyers for Attorney General Kamala Harris have argued in court that if forced to release these inmates early, prisoners would lose an important labor pool. Let's go to the next one. Wildfires. The debate centers around an expansive state program to have inmates fight fires. California is one of several states that employ prison labor to fight wildfires, and it is the largest such program as the state's wildfire program rapidly expands, arguably because of climate change. By employing prison inmates who are paid less than $2 a day, the state saved some $1 billion according to recent BuzzFeed featured practice. California relies upon no labor source, and only certain classes of nonviolent inmates charged with lower level offenses are eligible in selective program. They must meet the physical and otherwise criteria. California is paying inmates $1 to fight fires. In another case, they're using the slave labor, the 8 cents away from slave labor in other capacities, arguing in court that if they got rid of that slave labor plus 8 cents, that it would negatively impact the state of California. Think about what's being said here. People who were convicted of a crime, California, the office of Kamala Harris was shocked and chagrined that there was gambling in the establishment, saying after the fact she was shocked that her office was making that argument. But Kamala Harris, the one that's running for president, her office made the argument that we need to pay these people 8 cents an hour because if we pay people a decent wage, that our budget would collapse. We must keep close to slave labor. This is the argument. We're not paying people a decent wage. These people were convicted. They weren't convicted in order to be slaves. They were convicted to serve time and be rehabilitated. California and many other states jumped on the opportunity, including companies, to take advantage of these inmates in this particular situation. Let's keep going. It gets worse. Let's go to a topic nobody likes to talk about. Rape. Prison rape. More than 200,000 men are raped behind bars each year. We don't pay attention to that. We use it to some degree even as a punchline. But it's not a punchline for the people who are locked up, especially if you're talking about nonviolent. You get popped on a drug charge because a cop caught you just driving somewhere, caught you black while driving. You just so happened to have a bag of pot in your car. You weren't swerving, you weren't doing anything else, you weren't hurting anybody. They're going to legalize pot in your state maybe in a few weeks, maybe in a few months. But in this particular moment, this alcoholic cop busts you. You end up in a jail cell because you can't afford bail, which is the majority of people. Assume for the moment you end up in jail. Do you want to be raped just because you end up in jail? But we take this as somewhat of a punchline, but we're talking about violent crime with men pushing themselves on other men in a violent way. We don't pay much attention to this because we consider, well, I mean, they did something to get locked up, so what does it matter? While rape under any circumstances is a violation, human rights advocates say rape in prison is also torture. It is. But again, it's prison, so we don't pay it any mind. We have a violent prison culture. I'm using these two examples to show that people who get into prison are manipulated, or you could say taken advantage of to some degree by the state, and in other degrees put into a violent scenario where they have to live with people who are, let's say, put in a pressure cooker environment where they need to survive. What do you do in pressure cooker environments where you need to survive? Take this to another example. The process of people getting put in prison. Plea bargains. Did you know that over 90% of people being locked up is done through plea bargain? Meaning not from the judge itself, meaning those people aren't convicted by the standpoint of a judge, but plea bargaining. I'm going to give you 30 years. Now, either I'm going to give you 3 years. I'm being nice today. I've had my coffee. I'm the prosecutor. If you make me go to court, if you make me get out of bed in the morning to do a trial, if I have to put my suit on and all of this other stuff, and I have to study books and I have to go through the case, if I have to do all of this stuff that I don't want to do, I'm going to push for 30 years. I'm being nice today, so you better take my 3 and get on with it. If you're an innocent person, what do? What does an innocent person do? You're facing 30 years. Do you roll the dice for 30 years or do you take the 3? What percentage do you think of innocent people would say, fuck it, I'll take the 3 because I don't want to take the chance of 30? Especially if the evidence may cut a particular way. If you know you're of a particular racial persuasion that may be more inclined to get locked up. If you believe that the evidence may cut a particular way, even if you're innocent, would you be more inclined to take the 3 years from the prosecutor who's telling you he's being nice today as opposed to the 30 that you may get if you go to court? It's even worse than that. Because of plea bargains, the system can quickly handle the criminal cases of millions of Americans each year, involving everything from petty violations to violent criminals. But plea bargain make it easy for prosecutors to convict defendants who may not be guilty, who doesn't present a danger to society, or whose crime may be primarily a matter of suffering from poverty, mental illness, or addiction. And plea bargains are intrinsically tied up with race, of course, especially in the era of mass incarcerations. Why do you have trials in the first place? Why do you have a jury of your peers? You have a jury of your peers because the thought is, within this process, you would have people, enough of them, enough of a distribution there where one person is not going to be the determining factor in what the person gets and whether the person is convicted. You've completely decapitated that process. 90% or more, right here, 97% of cases. The vast majority of felon convictions are now the result of plea bargains, some 94% at the state level and 97% at the federal level. Estimates for misdemeanor convictions run even higher. These are astonishing statistics, and they reveal stark new truths about American criminal justice system. Look at this part. About 80% of the defendants are eligible for court-appointed attorneys, including overworked public defendants who don't have time or resources to even consider bringing more than a tiny fraction of these cases to trial. The result, one frustrated Missouri public defender complained a decade ago, is a style of defense that is nothing more than meet 'em, greet 'em, and plead 'em. Meaning, even though technically you have the ability to meet a public defender, that public defender doesn't have the resources. There's a show, I believe it's on Showtime, where you can see the life of a public defender. They don't have the resources, and they don't have the time. Meaning, the incentive for the public defender is just to meet, to greet, and to get the person plead with the best plea deal they can do because they don't have time to take the person to trial. This idea that each and every person in America gets a fair trial is lunacy. And even once you get that trial and you get shuffled through the criminal justice system, you're awaited a criminal justice system at that point to be exploited as prison labor, where you would get 8 cents an hour, maybe if you're lucky, maybe more, or exploited by gangs. Is this what we want? Even if you don't like that a person committed some kind of crime and everything else, is that really what you want for your prisoners? What do you think is going to happen when those prisoners get out? Because believe me, at some point, those people may get out. You've just fundamentally fucked up a person for the period of time that they were in your criminal justice system and now exported them back into the population. What do you think the recidivism rate is going to be for somebody that's been exploited from the standpoint of criminal gangs? I guess I'm making a point to you that out of sight and out of mind doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be adversely affected by what is taking place in prisons. Right now, there's a prison strike that is taking place. This prison strike is to end prison slavery. There are multiple things that they're asking for, but ending prison slavery is one of the big ones. This is their page, and I'm going to go through the 10 demands. This one is gone a little bit longer than I wanted, so I'm going to go through these demands pretty quickly. Immediate improvement in conditions and policies that recognize humanity of men and women. Essentially, recognize the humanity of these men and women. They may have done something that the society has considered wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean they aren't human beings. We should treat them as such, even though they are technically the least of our society, because they are the people in a society where you care about the least. Immediate end to prison slavery, paid prevailing wage in their state or territory. I agree with this one. If somebody does a job, pay them for that job. This would immediately make this idea of prison labor somewhat of a sketchy prospect. Companies can get by on prison labor because, let's be honest, if you're paying somebody 20 cents an hour, that's a pretty damn effective slave force. Or, I'm sorry, 28 cents away from slave force. Rescind the Prison Litigation Reform Act to incarcerate a proper channel to address grievances and rights violation. From my understanding, the Prison Litigation Reform Act was pushed through under Bill Clinton that prevented prisoners from having their day in court. The idea of it was to tamp down on cases just for the sake of cases, like things just to muck up the prison system by inmates who's just throwing up prison cases. There's research on that goes beyond the scope of this, but ultimately that's what that is. They're saying get rid of it. Truth in Sentencing Act and Sentencing Reform Act rescind the possibility of rehab and parole. No sentencing to death by incarceration or any sentence without the possibility of parole. Essentially, 3 years life term. You know what I mean? You're saying this person is going to be in for 150 years. That's fundamentally a death sentence. And I don't take a position on that one way or the other. I'm just reading these out. I don't take a position on all these. I'm just reading these out. No sentencing to death by incarceration or any sentence without the possibility of parole. End to racial overcharging, over-sentencing, and parole denials of black and brown human beings. Black humans no longer to be denied parole because the victim was white. And a particular concern in southern states. Some of the structure in the southern states are racist. And it's not the structure, it's the people who are running these organizations and these institutions and who are picking these people up, meaning cops or judges or prosecutors. It's to understand that that level of racism can be intransigent, particularly in the South. They're saying, get rid of this idea of racial overcharging. I gotta be honest, I don't know how you do that, talking about in the South, especially since there are human beings that are in charge of that. But it's not a bad goal to put in as something that needs to be gotten rid of. End to racist gang enhancements. This person is a gang, so this person gets 50 extra years. Now, understand the contrary is also probably going to be true. Meaning, if you're getting rid of that enhancement, you also need to get rid of the enhancement for whites, saying this person is racist, so this person kills an African American and gets extra time. Both to those, to some degree, will be synonymous. No human denied access to rehab because they were labeled violent. Yes, that part I definitely agree with. State prisons must be funded specifically to offer more rehab services. Yes, absolutely agree with. Pell Grants must be reinstated. Agreed. Voting rights for all. Agreed. Voting rights should never be taken away under any circumstances from the standpoint of a prisoner. That's my take on it. They're using that as a weapon. I agree with many of these. I'm putting all of these articles at the bottom for you to see for yourself. But ultimately, what some of the prisoners and inmates say is, if you put us in violent conditions where people need to do violent things in order to get by, what do you expect those people to do? If a gang tells me that I need to kill somebody or they're going to kill me, what do you think I'm going to do? You're going to sentence me after the fact as if I've done something wrong without necessarily taking the environment into account for why I did what I did wrong. And I'm talking about in the prison system itself at this point. What is your goal? Is your goal to rehabilitate, or is your goal to just outright punish? And if your goal is to outright punish, are you going to keep that person in forever? Because at some point that person is going to have to go back out into the wider world. We need to fundamentally change how we do our prisons. And I would make the second point of saying we need to fundamentally change how we go about our society as a whole. We're generating these prisoners. Some of these people, like they said, 80% were just there for nonsense. It was just there for nonsense. And the people were poor and broke and just didn't have the money to pay their way out of the system, as opposed to somebody else where if you have wealth, you can pay your lawyers and everything else to, let's say it this way. We pretend as if we have an equal society, but there is a clear class distinction between a wealthy person interacting with the criminal justice system versus somebody who is broke. And the person who is broke is going to be bled dry. One of the examples I give, I think in The Guardian, talks about the case of a person who got picked up over nonsense. And the person got stuck in jail with a $1,500 fine that they were already broke, that they were going to lose their money for. I'm making a point that the criminal justice system is fundamentally unfair in the way it goes about its affairs, especially in dealing with people of poverty. This is a pushback. Most people will never know that this exists. It is the least of us. And yet, it is the thing that is pushing for the rights in this particular scenario. I don't necessarily know if I get behind all of these reforms, but there are a lot of these that I absolutely get behind. Out of sight is not out of mind. And at some point, you will have to interact with people who've gone through our criminal justice system. And the question is, do you want to focus on rehabilitation, or do you want to focus just on punishment? And if the focus is purely just on punishment, what is going to be the monster that you create that's preying the streets? Because you didn't want to make sure that that person was put together, nor did you care about why that person was even in there in the first place. It's not just the individual, your society is also, to some degree, at fault. Let's see. Ruben Garcia, hey Jamal, you should talk about the Attica prison riots. Oh, that would be a good one.